And to help work, I have a fantastic job being able to work with many different people from many different areas of expertise and to help mash that all together so that we can work as a team to try to create something better than any single one of those elements could do alone. So I feel like I have the best job in the world. What we're going to talk about here with regard to overall the topic of this session is marine mammal health and disease. I'm going to bring in unusual mortality events. So Dr. Ledger gave an example of the killer whale study as a nice example of the value of moving forward with use of pathology data to answer bigger questions. I'm going to do the same thing with unusual mortality events. And then when we're talking about, we talked about previous speakers about ways to look at health and disease. And so then we need to take that to say changing health and disease. So why should we care if health or disease are changing? And then to talk about, which Dr. Ledger kindly helped introduce, the relevance of health and disease to the Ocean Health Index. And in fact, all of our speakers were tasked and did a great job doing so. And then finishing up talking about health and disease surveillance. So how do we take all this incredibly valuable data, adding in more that many of you are collecting routinely? How do we pull that together to provide what the Ocean Health Index has on their front webpage, that pulling together the best available science and the existing scientific resources? I think that means don't ask for money, but with use of much less funding, you can leverage off a lot of what's being collected. So a potential plan that as a group we could develop is to say, if each of your entities had just a little bit more funding to be able to help integrate your data into a central place, you would get a huge cost benefit from it. So unusual mortality events. Francis was the chair for the working group for marine mammal unusual mortality. How many years, Francis? 6. I'm on year 2, and it feels like 10. It's a group of 12 subject matter experts that in various areas that are listed up here: infectious diseases, special types of species, special regions. We're trying to get even better about incorporating people, the biologists, population ecologists, to get much broader backgrounds. And in addition to those 12 subject matter experts, there are liaisons from some of the key agencies, NOAA, USGS with Fish and Wildlife Service, CDC, the Marine Mammal Commission, and then we get to group Canada and Mexico institutions, entire countries, but representations from the countries, because marine mammals and diseases don't really care about borders often. And so what the group does is we recommend that if there's a mortality event happening in marine mammals, the region has the opportunity to request it to be reviewed, for it to be assigned as an unusual mortality event, or a UME, which is the term I'll use from here on out. And so the request goes to this working group. We review it. We have a preset 7 criteria that we would have to say if it's a UME, it has to be based upon at least one of the 7 criteria. We provide a recommendation to NOAA and Fish and Wildlife Service, who then, depending on the species affected, would then federally declare a UME. So that's just the process of it. But it's nice knowing here's a pre-existing entity that's already helping to identify what's unusual, so it can be useful. And the working group also works with the investigative team for each of the unusual mortality events as we're needed and requested to help identify the cause and underlying risk factors of events while they're ongoing. So the most important thing to bring up here is that with the UMEs, the most common reasons why a mortality event is noted as a UME is because stranding numbers are above the expected baseline, or because there's a shared, because there are shared unexpected pathologic lesions. So both of those have the word, one has expected and unexpected. So it means that in order to meet this criteria, you have to know what's expected and you have to know what baseline is. And so that's one of the biggest challenges it is, and one of the reasons why having groups work together for data in, we much better understand what's unusual if we know what is usual. So it's getting real interesting now. They're coinciding with my chairwomanship, became some of the largest UAVs in the history of the nation. So I got condolence cards from both of the previous chairs. So in early 2010, now we have over 800 bottlenose dolphins. So the largest UAV in recorded history in the U.S. continues and is ongoing today, involving cetaceans in the northern Gulf of Mexico. This is made extra fun because this die-off coincided with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and we found brucella associated with fetal losses, which raised all kinds of great questions from the media and the public with regard to public health concerns of a potentially zoonotic in these little fetuses that were washing ashore. For the 2011 was also fun because we had rubber seal desks. Thank goodness we had Dr. St. Ledger on board. And in New England, and the reason why this raised so much interest, again, not just because we have a high number of marine mammals stranding, but because it involved, as Dr. Rivera shared, a highly pathogenic avian influenza virus, which then raises the hackles of many folks around the world being concerned about pandemic potential. Is this going to be the next flu that's going to cause a pandemic? And the question of an influenza pandemic is not if, but when. And so there's a constant eye out for when that jump is going to happen. And marine mammals are now of great interest because of your great work. So, and then also that year, we have in 2011, we had ice seal deaths and then morbidity, not mortality, in walruses in Alaska. And this had a big question. This was a big issue. And I'll have a slide talking about it a little bit separately. It was exciting because Alaska, ill animals could also meet ill animals in Russia and Japan and Canada, and had the potential, has the potential of having affected many different species, but that's still ongoing. But first and foremost were the food security concerns. And so I have a separate slide on that. So, very important is with these UAVs that the public cares. They really care about these UAVs. The amount of media coverage on these three events were a job in itself. For each of those UAVs was a full-time job for people just to handle the questions from the public, and I try to stay out of that as much as possible. So why should we care, those of us working with marine mammals? So we give Alaska an example and why the Ocean Health Index is really lacking a critical component without incorporating marine mammal health. So if we take Alaska, I was just up in Anchorage last week for their marine mammal conference, and this graph here, I know it's tiny, but I have a bunch to what this is, this could have been the poster for the entire conference, because there wasn't, I don't think there were many presentations that didn't start out with this graph, but what this is this was projected sea ice loss, the black line here, from basically 1900 to 2100. And what they're seeing is this. So there was one talk that said that there's a possibility that by 2050, there may be, it's possible to have a no sea ice year. So that has already manifested itself, the decrease in sea ice up there because of climate change and other factors has resulted in higher clustering of marine mammals. Here walruses have been clustering at unprecedented rates because of the loss of sea ice. And so you can see this picture here, all those little tiny dots are walruses. And when you add that with a new disease of unknown origin, we start seeing not only UMEs, and this was the first large-scale terrestrial-based UME in marine mammals in the history of Alaska. Not only did we see this hair loss and skin lesions in ice seals, but then there were similar lesions popping up around the same time in the walruses. And there are some other folks showing some suspect lesions in polar bears as well. And then you add on top of that you have indigenous people out there, and the natives and the hunters, who are, while all of this is really interesting for us from a mammal side, they're looking to say how I need to feed my children, and this is a part of my culture, and we're really frightened by seeing these things that we've never seen before. Alaska has its own surveillance system because the hunters are out there and they know what is usual, what's unusual, and they see these lesions happening, sick ice seals that they could approach and weren't skittish, didn't run away at all, and they couldn't eat them. So they needed a response much faster than our traditional UME response, and it shouldn't be us, it needs to be public health officials getting involved. So we're really, Alaska is just a great example of showing how the change in the ocean, the change in the environment is leading to real changes in the behavior, the positioning of animals, the potential emergence of new pathogens from melting sea ice, and then this infecting animals, and then now affecting being a major food security concern in the region. How about that? So when we look at the Ocean Health Index specific to UMEs, luckily Dr. Siglander provided a nice, broader overview of it. When we look at what are the high priorities for, what are the high priorities for the Ocean Health Index? Food provision. So better understanding health of marine mammals is important from a food security concern. And then also, if there are problems like increased contaminants in the fish that we eat, as I mentioned, these animals are top predators, so that we may see that health issues manifested in the marine mammals first. Clean waters is an important measurement, and listed under clean waters are pathogens. So the fine work that Dr. Rivera and her team are working on really need to keep an eye on what those emerging pathogens are to address the OHI's questions about how clean our waters are. And then finally, with regard to biodiversity, that's specifically called out endangered species. And all it would take is one good infectious disease like morbillivirus to come along that could possibly wipe out an endangered group like mammal seals. But we're prepared for that, right? So my last 2 slides, I think, here is really talking about how to pull all that data together. And hopefully these previous slides are helped to make the pitch. They're probably preaching to the choir here of why marine mammal health and disease is important to assess ocean health, is that the best way to assess change and to detect change in health and the emergence of diseases is targeted, standardized, and routine surveillance. There are ways that just by adding a little more money to activities that you're doing to convert it into a research project, into a longer-term surveillance system, then we might be able to help find folks that would be interested in funding that. I have here a list of currently available resources: the Sarasota Health Assessment, and the stranding, the level A data that you're collecting with strandings, the work, Pam, that Pam Yoakum and Hubs is doing. There are lots of routinely collected health data that you're all doing. If we could find a way to get that integrated, would be great. Then I have to say we need to not only collect it, but then it needs to be routinely analyzed so that the system itself detects when something is strange. It doesn't wait for us, and so that would be the final challenge. But the first step is to get that data all together. And then Judy helped show what we've started doing is just that. What this is a centralized database that's now standardizing. We're painfully going through individual PDF reports, converting it for whether it's gross pathology, histopathology, level A data, contaminants data, diagnostics, and we're putting it in a standardized fashion so that now we're able to query it and ask all kinds of questions in that database, look for associations. between, or differences and similarities between different populations. So there are lots of people that have taught, that have contributed to this. Like I say, I get the fun part of just integrating data and from other people who collect it. And it taught me the value of all these different areas. And then we'll move on into the discussion period. But I will open up to just one or two questions if there were any on that. And
Stephanie?
yes.
I have a question on your database. Is it an Access database?
It is. It's so the question is if this is an Access. It's super simple. To make it more robust, I would prefer if it wasn't something that I made, but because I'm an epidemiologist, I can play with it. But if we have a couple test groups who will use it, Judy is going to be one of them. Refine it, make it more robust, and when it's a good product that we can use across several different groups, then I would recommend we go and find funding for a real database person to make something that could then be testable, updatable, available on the website, things like that. But so this is kind of like a blueprint or a beta version. But it is available to anybody who would like it for free.
My question's about something you touched on, the issue of risk of diseases in sort of endangered populations. Like if you have a morbillivirus epizootic in a population of a few hundred individuals, or the key that gets the sniffles, you're done, right? So you're talking about monitoring. Do we just sort of watch it happen, or is there a farther range that you can sort of monitor at? I mean, just say more about that risk factor. Something I haven't really thought of before.
Absolutely. So is it just going to be, is it just monitoring? So the example is, before this I worked at the CDC, and every year it would be around farming time and the county fair time. And we would just sit and wait till when our surveillance systems would start picking up E. coli infections because of the kids going to pet the animals. And we did it where it's like, okay, we just have the surveillance system so that we can say, yep, it happens every year, and where is it actually helping to intervene? The hope is, and Francis, you could be good at answering this, an example would be helping with like a plan, like a vaccination program for the Hawaiian monk seals against morbillivirus, where we wouldn't necessarily want to do it without, well, I'll let you go ahead, Francis.
Yes, so I guess you can, and I suppose we already do the nature where animals actually strap, they actually can't eat. They do get picked up and taken into the rehab center. So there is that level of intervention already. As far as sort of going out and treating the human sniffles, that's a really bad example. I'm really not working that one. There have been really few examples, and I think it's really come from the plummeting paranoia and concern about potential adverse impacts. So I think, as far as I'm aware, there have been a few examples of giving whales antibiotics, and that was to humpback whales swimming up the river. So there was so much media attention and so much of the sort of media saying, well, what are you going to do? Because it was a dog with an antibiotic cover. So there was enough public pressure that we sort of overweighed the potential concerns of the public side. And the only other example I know is developing a vaccine for Hawaiian monk seals to treat them if and when there is a morbidity virus outbreak. And that took a whole series of steps, which actually Tom Yilcomb in front of you really was a ringleader in starting. And the sort of sense as well, we vaccinate dogs for morbidity virus, it's completely safe, routinely done. Many of the zoos and aquaria are vaccinating the stellars and pandas against morbidity virus. So, well, if you wanted to vaccinate a monk seal, what would be the steps to go through? So he said, okay, first non-endangered pinheads like harbor seals or elephant seals. So Pam actually led an effort to use a vaccine that had been safely used and other zoo animals on harbor seals. She showed that that was safe. Then we vaccinated one male captive monk seal, and then determined the effect on him. And now the sort of next stage of the plan will be to vaccinate female monk seals in captivity in oh, I was going to say this right, in that
Permanent.
permanent rehab. They're not allowed to use the word captain. They're not allowed out, but they're not allowed out in Texas. Correct. So they will be vaccinated, and then I think there would be a comfort level from the permits office that this vaccine is safe. So right now we have it in hand. So if there was a case of morbid virus in monk seals, they would get vaccinated. But I don't know of any other interventions at the population level. Oh, the health level. Yeah. Gosh, maybe she could speak to treating
We vaccinated California C9 pups and Northern Curacao pups with hookworm ivermectin, actually. And it was very effective. Vaccinated?
Not vaccinated,
Treated, sorry. I'm not a vet.
Yeah.
And so they work very well in northern fur seals. We kill them because they're wild. One of the issues you run into is that if it's something that you have to treat multiple times, you can have trouble having to do that. If it's, in the case of ivermectin, it worked really well with northern fur seals. One shot was enough. It increased their survival almost 3 times over animals that got placebos. California sea lions did not work very well at all, and we think largely because hookworm in that species lasts for almost 6 months, and we could only give them 1 shot. So it helped a little bit, but nothing like the results we saw from fur seals. So, and the idea of that work was the idea of whether or not ivermectin, which is traditionally given to dogs, could in fact be used in monk seals or other marine mammal species that might come into hookworm. I don't know if you saw the talks this morning, but hookworm can be pretty devastating in terms of mortality for pups. So that was the...
And actually we have to monk seals on the northwestern islands with a dewormer that you put on the skin, and then it just diffuses in and zaps them.
If you want someone to come deworm your animals, then Francis will be there. And then the other thing with this infectious disease, so with surveillance, with the vaccine program is it's ongoing because right now they appear to be naive, like they haven't been exposed to the morbillivirus that you're looking at, and so that the ongoing surveillance is if a case is found, so then you know that okay, this is new and we should care, then that would be the trigger to lead to the vaccine program. And then the other is if you've seen any Outbreak movie. Outbreak was bad, Contagion was good, by the way. Liquefied organs, resolid anyway. That the hospitals tend to be the places where which help propagate an infectious disease. So if we have surveillance that are able to rapidly identify in the face of an event, the rehab centers are where we would want to know rapidly whether, and to be able to survey for an infectious disease, a pathogen, and to know whether it's new or there or not. So to help with quarantining animals and to come up with plans. Because we always kind of get stuck with that during the UME investigation of what if this is really contagious, and then it just starts running wild. And rehab centers, then where you have multiple species that may not normally be in contact, now they're getting in contact, and then we send them back out. So those would be some examples.
Did you and your teams, did you ever evaluate the reports that came out of the 1987 and 88 mass mortality of dolphins along the East Coast? And if so, I read all those reports, and it seemed like every single one had different conclusions as to what caused it. I'm not sure if they ever got to a final,
Well, I think morbillivirus was the key leading infectious agent. So it would be like the star of the parade. And then now better understanding that things like previous or the concurrent exposure to marine biotoxins made them more susceptible. And we're learning more and more that looking at this idea of multiple stressors or multiple things, if they're sitting on a high load of contaminants, is that going to put them at higher risk of death when a new virus comes to town?
I don't know if you remember, but there were also at the same time, or just prior to that, there were bags of blood and needles washing in along some of the coasts where apparently the hospitals had proposed dispose of the stuff? Was there any connection in between anything in those bags and the up in the marine mammals?
Not that we've seen in any formal reports, and luckily morbillivirus while it is closely related to human measles virus, it wasn't something that had just made a jump from, let's say, a needle that had, or a bag full of measles blood. But these opportunities for new viruses, Rebecca helped find an astrovirus that was recombined part sea lion, part human. So two viruses got together and now it created a nice little virus out there that can infect us and them. So these types of things are happening probably all the time. Okay, so I think what I'd like to do then is open it up for our discussion, and now we get to work. And so the two questions, and we can really kind of take this in any way you want it to, but I thought we could start out this way, which is to talk about which marine mammal populations, diseases or pathogens might be most important to helping to measure the Ocean Health Index, and then, and I should also say health, measurements of health, and then what are current potential data sources, and maybe what we should do is see how far we can take this conversation, just talking about California, since this is a Southern California Marine Mammal Workshop, to monitor these changes. So I like, my other hat is I get to facilitate a lot of meetings. So for those who are familiar, I always make tables and we just fill in the boxes because it's a lot easier that way. Now what we'll do is we'll just have some free conversation. I might need a van because I think I'm going to be typing on the computer to run the mic around. But to start raising your hand and talking about ways that with regard to the Ocean Health Index, if we talked about these three areas that were important, the food provision, clean waters, and biodiversity. We're not eating marine mammals in Southern California, so you can put this one on hold to make sure that we focus on California first. But maybe looking at monitoring for pathogens and contaminants, and then as well as potential threats to marine mammals directly here in California, and then to talk about within each of these boxes, what would be the targeted marine mammal populations. So when you talk about surveillance, it should be a population of animals that's well studied. You can get a lot more out right now if it's a population that has a wealth of data already and looks like they will have funding to continue to do so. So those would be marine mammal populations to list, any that are endangered. And then I'm talking about targeted diseases or pathogen, or many of you might be collecting health data, so population structures or abundance estimates. And then to talk about what might be the easiest boxes to fill are available data sources with which you're aware that might be able to feed into really the main goal being assessing marine mammal health and emerging diseases and being able to detect if a disease is emerging or if health is changing. That kind of makes sense? Sort of? Okay, well, I'll open it up and see if you guys can kind of take it into a even clearer fashion.
I would like to, can we start with the Ocean Health Index and kind of look at the bigger picture for 1 second. I know a few of us have been collecting all sorts of, you might want to call them health data points, but looking at toxins, biotoxins, heavy metals, stomach contact data, and all sorts of data on stranded animals. And since the beginning of Prescott, which is now 10, 11 years old, we're now sitting on a lot of data that could really get at, well, I don't know, I'm going to put it to you guys, can it get at the health of the population looking at these data? And can it get to the question of, is there any kind of synergism, or can heavy metal load increase DA or DDE? Can that increase the effects of DDE or of demonic acid? And how do we get all of our data together and start to answer some questions now that we're sitting on all this data?
question. I've got all these gifts, I don't know what to do with them. So, that's fantastic. So what we would need to do, and one thing that has just been amazing to see over the last 5 years, and really the last 2 years, are people's willingness to share their data. 10 years ago, it was we just kind of had to stop talking because it was just too hard and people's trust had been lost. Those who tried to share data got burned. But now, just in the last couple of years, I think because we're starting to see the value and we're respecting each other and making sure that everybody gets due credit, there's trust. And so by sharing data, we can get to new answers. So the fact that there are existing data, I would start by, if you weren't there already, using all those data to define baseline. And say, okay, we have collected all this data over this time, this is what we've seen as baseline. While you're doing that, you might find some areas that are outside the norm, and then you kind of pull those out and kind of figure out what the neat story is. The more we can get all this different type of data, like you talked about, into the same format, the database that I put up there, you just go to the back end and you query out any pieces you want. You can pick out the morbillivirus and age and species, or morbillivirus and biotoxin level, and heart lesions. So then you can go and you can ask the database all kinds of questions like this. If you want it to be simpler, you can start with a question that you have and start by putting the pieces together of data that you are interested in. But if there is a willingness and readiness at this point for Southern California to put data together, I would honestly encourage that first. But even if it's within your own organization, finding a way that it all fits into one group, kind of like what we basically had to do for the Gulf of Mexico. Otherwise, it was just too big and too messy, too fast. So we had to find a way to get lots of different kinds of data talking to each other. But that's great.
Well, I mean, I think all the data was collective. It's the intentions of coming to some health questions and using them as sentinel species. And I guess I'm wondering, are we there? Can we answer those questions? And if we're not there, what do we need to get there? And are there resources to help us get there? Especially if Prescott goes away, would there be other resources to continue in this direction?
Yes. Once you have more than 1 year of data, or you've collected more than once, you're already able to start talking about the differences between type 1 and type 2. So if you have several years, you're absolutely ready to just start. And then just start by doing what you're describing as baseline. This is baseline of all these different data. And then you'll start seeing the interesting, it's kind of this constant dance between data entry and then analysis, and then it targeting you toward creating your questions. And you go to answer that question, and it creates you find a whole new thing that you start chasing. It's endless. The records office at the Navy's Marine Mammal Program, we have 6 staff in our records office, and we are busy 100% of the time. This is 100 animals, but 50 years of data. The questions never stop coming in. The clinicians never stop asking questions. Constant ability to pull from a single database and answer lots of questions. But you got to get it all together first.
So I wanted to maybe raise the, your slide's the one. We skipped over the food safety because the marine mammals are not being consumed. But they are consuming a lot of the same things that we are. So I'm wondering if it's possible to maybe look at them as kind of indirectly, either looking directly at stomach contents and things that might use toxin loads or contaminants or even disease, I don't know, but things you might see in stomach contents, or kind of marine mammals that are eating similar prey assemblages that we.
So Sarah brought up a good point with regard to food. While we're not eating marine mammals, we are eating the food that marine mammals eat. And so continuing to say that even in California, that the collection of marine mammal health and feeding data fits under the food security piece.
So like as a data, in that data source box, maybe stomach content analyses or stomach content samples that people might have archived might fall in it? I don't know.
So one thing we found interesting,
and I'd like group input on this, is stomach content analysis. It's a very non-specific statement, and what's important is to know what you're analyzing for. So Michelle, what are you doing with your stomach contents? What are you analyzing for?
Hard parts.
So prey identification, and do you know the methodology that was used for the prey identification?
Yeah.
Oh, so this is important because some folks say, you know, I've got my stomach content analysis, here's what's in it. And it really depends on what you're looking for what you find and what's in it. And it was interesting this morning to hear about, well, we used to sift the scat at 0.7 millimeters, but now I do it at 0.5 millimeters because I'm measuring and I'm finding other things. And I think we all need to make sure we know what we're looking for when we say we have stomach content or we're going to do stomach content analysis. What else would you measure for? Certainly biotoxins, certainly prey analysis. What else?
Stomach fullness, so weighing the stomach before and after.
So volume of content relative to total gastric volume. Is there anything else folks are looking at in stomach contents? I know, Francis, you worked with some of the HAP folks when they were first identifying diatoms. I don't think anyone's routinely looking for the distribution or the ratios of diatom components within gastric contents, but in the grand scheme of baseline, that might be helpful information.
But wouldn't you get that if you did biotoxin analysis of the gastric fluid?
Biotoxin analysis would give you content of the gastric fluid, but wouldn't necessarily tell you about the diatom ratios and the different algal components that would be in your stomach contents.
So the issue have most of the acute glycolic acid poisonings is that they vomit, so they actually don't have these stomach contents.
Right.
But the feces are usually pretty helpful, and you can pick up frustules on electron microscopy, and that's actually how that's actually usually more rewarding. It's easier to do than looking for
The toxin. And so those frustules are the little organisms that are producing the toxin. So rather than looking for the toxin. So one of the challenges we're facing, and I'd love extra input if folks have it, are what are the things that you think should be screened for that could be screened for?
I think at the Tampa conference, there's a group that was looking at the characterizing the gastric flora and fauna and looking at differences between groups. So essentially metagenomics of the biota and that kind of stuff.
And actually just plastics. We get so many calls now about plastics, little bits of plastic, big bits of plastic. See if those plastics absorb contaminants, and if we've found little bits of plastic in the past, I thought we would keep them and use them for contaminant analysis. But there's a big interest now in how much they absorb. Absorb. Hold on to little bits of contaminant.
There was a group looking at the micro plastics, like microscopic plastic. So when plastic breaks down to its smallest components, it's microscopic, I guess.
I have a different question. I study skin lesion on bottlenose dolphin, the coastal population here, and maybe my question is mostly for Cynthia. Do you do any analysis? Do you do anything with skin lesion that you observe on the animals?
Cynthia has never seen skin lesions on a dolphin.
Yeah, we do. It depends on, in general, when we're looking at skin lesions. I don't know if your question is specifically cetacean or pinniped.
Cetacean.
Cetacean. Yeah, so for cetacean skin lesions, some of them, as you I'm sure know, are characteristic enough that you can make some assumptions right off the bat just from the appearance. So photo documenting and then following progression, if you have the option, whether from photo documentation in the wild or from tracking the animal closer than that. But biopsy has been very important, and then when we do take skin biopsies, there's so many different things you can do with that skin biopsy. So it really depends on the appearance of the lesion and which direction you go. If you suspect a viral, then we'll send it out for NEM and PCR. If you expect or suspect bacterial fungal, you can go the culture route as well as PCR. So we have a whole list of different things. And then of course, histopathology. How could I forget that? I'm so sorry, Dr. Stanley. That would be my first choice. And actually it would. Cytology and histopathology, extremely important, because that's also going to, not just your visual, what you can see with your naked eye, but then what are they seeing under the microscope can point you in a certain direction. So we have a whole list of different things that we would do. And then, like I mentioned, like pox-like lesions are pretty characteristic. There is now thought that there could be herpes virus associated lesions as well that are mixed in with the pox. So, but yes, so the long answer, sorry, to your short question was that yes, there's a whole list of things that we do, and it just depends on how important it is and how much is it overtaking the animal's skin percentage-wise as to how much we would follow that. And then how, if it's just a single animal or if it seems to be spreading throughout the population. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it would be really interesting to look at time and temperature and probably all of those things that could really be very telling. And you can see it outside, which is really nice.
Yeah, actually, let me just throw one thing in there too, that often skin lesions are a reflection of what's happening inside. And so it's a reflection of a systemic disease, not necessarily just isolated to the skin. And often, pox is back to the pox, a good example of, you see an animal with a ton of pox lesions, that usually indicates that something else is going on. Something has altered their immune system, or something is going on so that their pox is flaring up. So it's not just the skin. The skin is a wonderful organ to reflect whole body health, and so it's a really good organ to monitor.
And then Rebecca will be happy to give you a list of viruses to test for. Other questions or other thoughts about it? What I'm thinking is, because this is ends at 4:15, that what I'd like to propose to do is we'll leave a pad of paper up at the front, and if you're interested in having a smaller session that the foundation, our group, will help plan, and we can get together and actually hammer through some of these things that might be really good to start with. How do we set up the surveillance system? Do we pick a couple of proof of concept projects? Do we take data that's just waiting to be churned, but a smaller group of you who are maybe your minds are really churning right now, to save those of you who your mind's getting hungry.
No, I just one area that I keep thinking about is in our conventional vet world, we have our animal and you archive blood. But in your world, the field world, we archive photographs and sometimes skin or other biopsies. But they're sort of two not compatible. And then sometimes there'll be conversation about, oh, how do we ground truth our progesterone level, or it would be great to know whether. So I'm wondering, in your world, would you be open to archiving skin? I mean, I know it's more invasive than blubber, but the value you would have is animals of that known life history and reproductive stage. So it would be fantastic to look at some of the, help ground truth some of the field studies that use skin that don't have access to blood. I'm asking in front of everyone, so you have to.
What this is referring to is just that, right, so my world goes in between both the wild and the managed animal world. So as veterinarians, we often do that, and we play that role where we just care about all of the animals. So we try to take the best care we can of both wild and managed. And so I have access to the Navy's Marine Mammal Program population because our group provides their health care. And so they have, we do have skin archived. So every animal, although it's just on the dead animal, so every time there's a dead animal, which is rare, there's a huge chunk of skin that's archived in the freezer that could be compared to wild animal skin samples. So there is a large amount of tissue just waiting for someone to ask for that kind of investigation, which would be great. I mean, really big chunks, because it was taken for toxin analysis, which just in case anybody ever wanted it, and a lot of formalin-fixed tissues. In terms of archiving it prospectively, that would certainly be an interesting concept, because there would be so much value in it. And so it's just a matter of looking at the justification for doing that, and then making a strong case for it. And I think it sounds like there is one. Yeah. And then if we can come up with some kind of remote blood sampling instrument, Sean Johnson, where are you? You can figure that one out. That'd be great. Yeah, too.
Yeah, and a good example of Dorian Hauser got, I guess it was an ONR grant where he did do that. He did blubber with the Navy population. And I have to say, it was one of the most extensive scrutinized ICOs at the Navy we've ever seen. It's a really big deal to do that, to take a biopsy. It was a really big deal. So, but of ground truthing, taking the blubber, matching it with the hormone levels in the blood for different ages, sex and things like that. And that's one role of the foundation is our mission is to help expand the ability for this unique population of animals to meet not only national security needs, but broader national interests.
Yeah, you don't need to, I'll yell. So because this is emerging disease session, do you think that all these are emerging diseases, or do you think that we're just looking and we're better at finding them?
So the question is, emerging because we're looking more, or because they're really emerging? And that's where the heart of the surveillance comes. I think because the NIMS stranding database for the last 10, even 20 years has been so good, that level A data, that when something's unusual, I believe it, as far as stranding numbers. We have people like Judy who has enough experience looking at marine mammals that if a pathologic lesion is standing out, and that, like if you saw lungworm in 10 animals, you'd say, I don't care. But if you saw what you saw with the pneumonia in the harbor seals, Judy was able to say, wait a second, there's something, this is unusual. But I think that there's a lot that we're missing with emerging. When Rebecca first started her work with Pam and then our other collaborators with viruses, we went from nothing ever cultured for virus, from like sterile animals to finding 8 viruses in a sample and then having no idea what to do with them because we're realizing they're all there. So when a new virus was found, the assumption was never it's a new virus. It's just, so now that we find those and then finding the ones that are most important, which is why the prioritization, then you start working on, if you think one's important, start developing that baseline. And then being able to go back, like to the Navy archives, tissue archives are stranded to say, okay, we think this is something new, let's go test tissues from 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, see if it was around. So we have to go through that every time. But the more we get an active routine surveillance moving forward, and the more that encompasses, the quicker you'll be able to say, hey, something's interesting here. There, Sean Johnson, you must have something going on. Nothing. No, thank you.
So I think the question that you wanted to get at is the thoughts on an active routine surveillance. What does that look like? How do people participate in it? How are those priorities set? So I guess I was wondering, do you have in your mind an example of an active routine surveillance, either in the human health world or in other animals, birds, those types of things that would kind of give a good case study or foundation to get that conversation started? Because I think there's so many different things that people could throw out in terms of what their principal interest is, but maybe there's a good place to start rather than starting from scratch of how they went about that, what their priorities were, and something that's already been done to model.
Yeah, the CDC has obviously been really good at surveillance. Their downfall is theirs pathogen specific. So that's one way you can do it. So like influenza right now is a really hot topic, and there's actually been, I don't want to say sufficient, but there has been funding to actively monitor marine mammals and look for influenza in marine mammals. So that would be an example of a hot topic that has funding. And so you develop that surveillance system because it's of interest and funding's available. And then to be honest, the more it's tied to public health, the greater the likelihood that there's funding for it. Judy has something to add. And what I'd say right now, the level A national stranding database is a stellar model of ongoing surveillance of 30 to 40 variables that's checked and standardized on a form that provides incredible value, and that potentially building out from that might be a good start.
I think on a population basis, the work that's being done right now with right whales is really kind of, in my mind, the best case scenario, because what they're doing is not only looking at what's happening with the live animals and their migrations and things, but sort of the individual animal monitoring is being roped into the individual animal health assessments. You know, they're not doing things like Sarasota with right whales, but when one of these animals dies, they've got a very comprehensive evaluation, which they then tie into a whole variety of living animal as well as animal habitat data points. And it really gives the most complete picture we have of a population. And I think we would do well if we could do that with more species and then integrate different species that live in same, spatial areas and how that interacts with their local environments as well as their whole population. So I think right whales are the best example I can think of at this time.
And of course, Judy's soon going to have a killer whale model, right, to follow. So it could be right finding the right models, but that's an excellent point. We'll have some examples of pathogen specific, species specific, but that could be carried over and repeated in different species, and then this idea of like the stranding model. Oh, it's fun.
Well, you have 10 minutes to build. No, I just wanted to make a comment. I worked with Stephanie at the Navy for 6 years, and it was great having this huge database with 6 people that could answer your questions right away. And now I'm at the Marine Mammal Center, where we have a ton of data, but we don't have any database managers or anything like that. And don't underestimate the challenge of developing a database and how much work it takes to maintain it. And you have to have someone dedicated to that, or 6 people dedicated to it. So it's not an easy task.
My records office folks actually rolled their eyes when Sean would walk into the room because he'd say, there's this one thing that drives me crazy about the database, and can you change it? So they were always changing it because of Sean.
Better, changing it.
For the better. Any other questions or thoughts?
And again, I'm new to the group, so I apologize if this has already been this idea has already come and gone. But it sounds like there's a ton of data. Like Sean is saying, there's a need for a database. We're talking about certain models, and so I don't know of a product or a suggestion from this group would be that there is a need for a centralized national database that also has a team attached to it that can analyze the data. It sounds like a NIMS thing. I mean, but I'm not NIMS, so I can't speak for them. And I know that it exists in a certain form, but if there was that and there was a team that was assigned to that task, I don't know if it's already happening, if it's already been discussed, but it sounds like the power in that would be what you were alluding to before, that then it would just allow you to analyze the data almost immediately and be able to have it set up so that would trigger things. So I think that's what you were suggesting. I just don't know if it could be a formal recommendation, and if that even necessarily means anything, and how, if it doesn't, how can we create some kind of recommendation like that?
Well, one thing we do in Original IPT is, one thing that we could look at doing is, again, this is going to take more than our half-an-hour conversation, but for those of you who are interested in this, developing a subgroup and see if we could provide a proof of concept in a region, which I don't know, could be Southern California. Just to see what we can do in California. I would hate, we've got the Marine Mammal Center because of the gorgeous data you have and the resource. Are you?
I think you should start regionally in Southern California and work with the Sencos group in Southern California to tie in with oceanographic and have variable.
Well, there we go. We already have it. So if we took Southern California and then you talk about the topics that are of interest here, the species that are of greatest interest here, the work you're already doing, and see if we could come up with a proof of concept. Because I think it will be region specific with regard to what's going to hold the greatest importance. And maybe we start with what are the key questions to be answered for the region, and then being able to pull in and talk with all the different folks, the population folks, biology, ecology, and to see what data are existing within Southern California that would be most important to be able to pull in.
Yeah, I'd agree with the regional stress on that, and as you said, 5-10 years ago, people didn't want to share data and everyone was afraid. I don't want to jump to the other extreme where we just put our data out on a national database for anyone to grab. So trying to rein it in, maybe, password access and a certain group of people accessing it would be a good way to start. I'm all for sharing, not broadcasting.
And I think I heard somewhere Southwest Fisheries is going to take it. Great. But yeah, and I think it starts with often starts with a smaller group, 10 to 20 folks that really trust each other and have a good relationship, and you really need to come to the table ready to share, because you know that you're going to answer a lot more questions that you've had by being able to incorporate other questions, and certainly including climate information is becoming more and more important and potentially vital. Yeah.
I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we can't underestimate the importance of funding. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we've got this fantastic level A database that we've got now, and the increasing quality of the data is because of things like the NOAA Prescott funding, and the fact that there is such a thing as a UME working group that has the funds to work these things up. That makes the National Marine Fisheries Service a giver as well as a taker of information, kind of like the model with the CDC. So the CDC is providing a service to physicians as well as accumulating information from them, in a bigger way. And I think that's why it's important for us all to encourage that type of investment in this kind of work.
We've been learning in the marine mammal community and with some of the different groups on the health front is that we've been starting to develop these 3-year, 5-year investment strategies, and it's been able to take those investment strategies successfully to Congress and get the virus work funded. And then when Pam took this investment strategy, not only did they say we'd love to fund it, they contacted those of us who made the investment strategy and said, how much would it cost to do the whole thing? So the better as a group we can articulate step by step what it is that we want to do and how much it costs, and then what the expected outcome of it. You'd be surprised that even though there's not a lot of money out there, it becomes so much more competitive. And then the attractiveness of having groups coming together and this idea of a region. I know Pacific Life Foundation, that's the point of this meeting, and if one of the products of it was, wow, we all decided we wanted to chat and do this proof of concept, it provides a lot more grounding for potential, funding sources. And a lot of it's because it's using the data that somebody has already paid a whole lot to get collected. So you want to make good use of that.
I'd just like to put out there some potential species to focus on, just to mull over in your mind. And what I would suggest for cetaceans is Tricia, since they're such a small population, they're really vulnerable to disease outbreaks, although we don't get a lot of strandings of them. And then also long-beak common dolphins, because we have so many of them. So those are two that I think would be good to consider in conversations.
That's great. Thanks, Carrie. So a question I think that we brought up with Southern California is they're offshore. Is that right? Is it harder to do captures and life health assessments on situations in Southern California versus kind of in Sarasota? You just kind of stand in water this deep and it's not that problem.
It's a lot easier on pinnipeds. So along those lines, though, I had one question for when you talked about the necropsy forms. You said you were focusing on killer whales, but as somebody who goes to the field in a remote place all the time, I'm not a vet. I have dead animals all the time, and people try to help me, like Francis and Pam, and they tell me what I'm supposed to take, and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. So it'd be really helpful, I think, for researchers. I don't know how many of you here are that, or stranding people, or what it is, but the composition of people. But it would be great if something like that gets developed for that to be then available for just the average field researcher that happens upon, dead animal completely opportunistically. And sometimes all I have is a pocket knife and maybe a sandwich bag or something. And it'd be great to know. I mean, now I'm always looking for domoic acid because Francis is always pounding on me to take brains and stuff. But a lot of the time, things we find are in various stages of decomposition, like you talked about. And it's hard for me to know, not being a pathologist and not being a vet, what would be useful to take. So we have standard things we take: blubber, skin, blood if it's fresh enough. But there might be some other things that would be general things that you would like us to take that maybe the stranding network actually takes, but that we don't, because I don't actually know what those things should be. So that would be really helpful. And in terms of developing species, I'm sure Frances puts in her pinniped word all the time. But,
Ocean Health Index.
Oh, excellent. But I think the other one, besides California sea lions, there are two others that would really offer unique regional components. One would be harbor seals, which I'm sure Pam and Frances have also put in their words for. And I would put in a word for northern fur seals because they are the only offshore pinniped that actually is an indicator. And we have a data set that goes back to 1975 looking at disease trends. So they're in a completely different, they offer us, and they're also not residents down here. So that might be a drawback, that they do spend all their time in the California current. And we have access to them in the summers to sample. So just something for you guys to think about if you're sort of trying to lay out species that would give you kind of a wide, both a coastal and offshore component to complement cetaceans.